Do you like the Oakland A's? Are you a fan of the Golden Knights? Do you love the Los Angeles Chargers? Well then, my friend, you're in the right place. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show with your host, Jake the Snake Silva, brought to you by the Spotlight Sports Network.
Just a couple nights ago, right now New York Mets fans are pissed. They're very much pissed off. They're disappointed. And they're not really happy with the outcome of what the season has looked like. But here's where you lose the focus. So what ended up happening was Javier Baez. He hits a home run, and then by the time he trots around, initiates a thumbs down. Does a thumbs down gesture. Francisco Lindor even did a thumbs down gesture, and so did Kevin Pillar. Now, why would they do that? Well, let me tell you something about the state of New York. Okay, New York's always money hungry. It's a never sleep, money hungry state, whether you're upstate or you're on the island. One or the other. And this is the kind of thing. If you've watched like how things run, even if you're watching the stock market as well, money never sleeps in New York. Especially if you live in New York and you're constantly watching television and you're always seeing JP Morgan and all of these other big time money hungry companies, Fortune 500 companies, that's what happens. The good folks at Wall Street never sleep. That's how it always has been. So money, financials, they're always all over the place. And that's just kind of how the state itself is run. And so when it comes to sports, New York is diehard about their sports. They really are. There's no room for disappointment. There's no room for underachieving. And there's no room for excuses. The fans all love their sports, no matter what it may be. The Jets, the Giants, the Islanders, the Rangers, the Mets, the Yankees, and the Knicks. Because barely people, and this is the funny thing, you have the Brooklyn Nets, but barely anybody is going to end up going and rooting for Brooklyn. But yet being competitive, they might. But I've hardly heard of anybody that were big-time Brooklyn Net fans. Think of it when they were New Jersey. That would have been a completely different story. But listen, I understand this watching Yankee fans. I do. And I'm just going to say this straight up. No sugarcoat, and everything. But New York fans have got to be the most bipolar fans in sports. But they're very passionate about it. They're very passionate about it. And after what had happened with the New York Mets and with Javi Baez and Lindor and Pillar, so this whole season went in. You have Steve Cohen, brand new owner, and chock full of money, goes and makes a big time trade to going and getting Francisco Lindor, and then spends big time money to making sure he stays. 10-year contract. Lump sum of money. Like, you think about it. You watch Fernando Tatis Jr. in San Diego get paid all that money, and now Lindor, he's got his money's worth. Then come trade deadline, they go and get Javi Baez. They wanted to load up the roster, they wanted to load up the lineup, and they wanted to make it better because it's all for one purpose, to get into the postseason, like a lot of teams do. But this is the funny thing about this whole entire scenario. Fans are always passionate about their team. They don't like underachievements. They don't like disappointment. So, of course, a lot of them are going to express their frustrations and they're going to express their feelings. But I find it very interesting that this went about. But here's the kicker. This is only the first year you're even witnessing Francisco Lindor, the Mets. And then the first half a season with Javi Baez off the trade deadline. And I understand with what Mets fans are feeling because they want to get into the postseason so bad. And you think of their division in the NL East. You got the Braves who stay competitive. You got the Phillies who are cooking, especially when it's Bryce Harper. You got the Washington Nationals at the time before the trade deadline. They had a hell of a pitching staff, and they won a World Series 2 years ago. And then there's Miami, which, let's be honest, how did Miami even get into the postseason? Oh, we remembered shortened season thanks to COVID. But regardless of all of that, the Mets are tired of underachieving. And you have one of the arguably the best pitcher in baseball in Jacob deGrom, which I understand the frustration. I understand the feeling. But also, too, this was all part of a year's worth process. They knew it when they went into the season, and this is where they are now. Mind you, they still have to figure out the rest of their rotation. Now, there are some arms coming back. I've ended up hearing about Noah Syndergaard possibly coming back. And then you have to think about, well, who can they really trust out of their bullpen? Because that sometimes seems to be the root of certain teams' struggles. If you don't go into the postseason with a solid bullpen that knows how to get through 7, 8, and 9 innings, you're in trouble. I mean, you look at all these teams in baseball right now with the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Astros, a lot of these teams, they all have a common goal, but each of them focus on the positions that they know they need to fix. And that's why the trade deadline is even there in the first place. The funny thing about this is even though of Baez and Lindor being so tight, both of them playing in Puerto Rico, the whole thought process of this is the Cubs were imploding. Rizzo goes to New York. Chris Bryant goes to San Francisco. Baez goes to the Mets. Lots and lots of players from the Cubs all went elsewhere. So they were imploding. And this whole topic of conversation, because first of all, relax. Lindor's not going anywhere. Okay? And ultimately, this is just the last year of Javi Baez's contract officially. So he's going to go where he decides he wants to. Whether he wants to come back to Chicago or he wants to go and take his business elsewhere. But at the same time, this is something where you know by next month, you've got to get into high gear. This and next month are the big time months because by the time you're in October and you don't know what your identity is, and at the same time you are struggling to get out of innings, you're basically screwed. But I understand the frustration with New York fans, and I know how passionate that they can be. And that's where they're trying to signal to the players, listen, we're paying you all this money, and we are not trying to underachieve. That was not the main goal. The main goal was to win the division, get to the postseason, and then be lethal in the postseason. Now the questions are everywhere. Because at this point, you don't know whether or not if this team's really trustworthy when it comes to putting themselves into the postseason. Because again, regular season and postseason are completely different atmospheres. Postseason it's the best time of year. It's pressurized. I love stuff like that. And at the same time, you cannot underachieve. You cannot afford to fail. And all of the above. And this is why, I mean, however the Mets are going to go about this by next year, time's ticking. But you got to love New York fans at times. Like, I hear this all the time. First of all, look at how the Yankees were. Yankees got plagued with injuries. People hated them. People were just absolutely disgusted. They were talking about Aaron Boone. They were talking about all these injuries with Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton and all these players. And yet, it came off of a 13-game win streak. And yet, they're battling for the wild card position and getting into the postseason, and then they love them again. It's just sometimes it's just like, look, do you love or hate your team? I get confused with that every time. I've been in New York 4 times in my life. And there are people that actually do love their team. There are people who are just absolutely disgusted about the team. Look, I can't begin to tell you how many times my grandfather, like, always, the topic of discussion is how terrible Eli Manning was last week. Okay? Like, that's always been the topic of discussion because playing in New York, there's all this pressure, and then you got the fans, you got the endorsements, you got all this stuff, and it's like, and it makes you wonder. You're like, especially when it came to the NBA draft and when it came to Zion, if Zion was really going to be the big-time successor in a state like New York, it is tough. It is tough to basically handle yourself amongst that pressure. But like I said, this is something that both sides really need to start to come to agreement on. Look, fans are going to be fans. It doesn't matter. What matters is if you are making the adjustments possible to making yourselves a competitive team in the National League, then by all means do so. Because you're not going to have enough time. Time's ticking and you're going to be right around the corner to postseason. And the last thing the fans want is another disappointing year and they can't get into the postseason and they got to do whatever it takes to make it happen. That's just my honest and full opinion from there. But again, that's just the way that you kind of look at it from here on out.